I watched him step out of the car in a tailored suit, shoes polished to a mirror shine, the kind of confidence money gives you when it finally stops apologizing for your past. He stood across the street from me, sunlight catching the watch on his wrist, and for one frozen second, the world felt unreal. Because years ago, this same man stood in front of me with empty pockets, trembling hands, and a promise that shaped my entire life. I'll marry you when I'm rich. That was the moment everything collided. The promise, the hunger, the love, the betrayal. And what he did next shattered me in ways I never saw coming. Welcome to my YouTube channel. This is my story of betrayal, and if you've ever trusted the wrong person, hit that subscribe button because you are not alone. Here is how it happened. I wasn't always standing on this street with my heart racing and my past staring back at me. There was a time when my world was much smaller, quieter, and painfully simple. Back then, love didn't arrive in expensive cars. It arrived hungry. It arrived tired. It arrived wearing worn-out shoes and eyes full of shame. I was reading comments on my YouTube videos the other day, and I realized I wasn't the only one who had built a future around someone else's words. So many of you wrote about promises whispered in the dark, vows made with nothing but hope, and how those promises linger long after the people who made them disappear. That's when I knew I had to tell this story from the very beginning, the part no one ever sees. Years ago, I lived in a neighborhood people drove past with their windows rolled up. It was the kind of place where ambition felt dangerous and dreams had to be hidden so they wouldn't get stolen. My mother used to say, "Survival comes before happiness." I believed her until I met him. He was new, clearly out of place, carrying a small bag and a bigger burden. Everyone noticed him, not because he was loud, but because he looked like someone trying not to be seen. He took a job washing dishes at the corner cafe where I worked evenings after school. The first night I saw him, he dropped a stack of plates, and instead of swearing, he just closed his eyes like he was bracing for bad news he already expected. The manager yelled. Customers stared. I did the only thing that felt natural. I handed him a towel and helped clean the mess. That was our first conversation. Not names, not dreams, just silence and broken porcelain. Over time, silence turned into small talk. Small talk turned into shared breaks behind the cafe, sitting on milk crates, splitting meals because he couldn't afford lunch. I didn't ask why he was alone. He didn't ask why I worked so hard. We just understood each other in that quiet way people do when both are tired of explaining themselves to the world. I started bringing extra food from home. At first, I pretended it was leftovers I didn't want. He knew I was lying, but he accepted anyway. Each time he ate, he avoided my eyes, like gratitude embarrassed him. One night, he finally whispered, "I'll pay you back, I swear." I laughed and said, "Just survive first." That was the first lie I told myself, that this was temporary, that feeding him didn't mean anything, that the way he looked at me like I was the only safe place left wouldn't cost me later. We grew closer in secret ways, long walks after work, talks about everything and nothing. He told me about growing up poor, about watching his parents argue over money, about swearing he'd never be weak again. I told him about being judged for my skin, my neighborhood, my dreams that felt too big for where I came from. One night, sitting under a flickering streetlight, he said the words that rewired my future. His voice shook, not with doubt, but with fear of hoping too much. He said, "When I'm rich, I'll marry you. I promise. I just need time." I should have questioned it. I should have laughed it off. Instead, I believed him with everything I had, because when someone who has nothing promises you everything, it feels sacred. From that moment, my life quietly reorganized itself around him. My plans, my patience, my sacrifices. I skipped opportunities that didn't include him. I defended him when people warned me. Men like that don't come back, they said. Promises don't pay bills. But love isn't logical when you're young and starving for meaning. Then, slowly, success started knocking on his door. A scholarship, a mentor, a chance to leave. He was glowing in ways I'd never seen. And I was proud, so proud it hurt. The night before he left, I fed him one last meal. He held my hands, looked into my eyes, and repeated the promise, stronger this time, louder, like saying it twice would protect it from the future. I'll come back. For you. I watched him walk away the next morning, telling myself this was just the beginning of our forever. I didn't know that some beginnings are actually endings in disguise. And years later, when that black car pulled up and he stepped out as the man he always said he'd become, I realized something was terribly wrong. Because the look in his eyes wasn't love. It was recognition mixed with something else. Something dangerous. And that's when the real story began. The years between his departure and his return didn't pass gently. They dragged, they scraped, they demanded payments I didn't know I was making until I was empty. At first, he called every week, sometimes twice. His voice came through the phone, thin but excited, full of plans and numbers and people whose names I couldn't pronounce. He talked about classes, about late nights, about how hard it was, but always ended the same way. "Just wait for me," he'd say. "This is for us." I waited. I worked longer hours. I sent what little money I could, even when it meant walking home instead of taking the bus. When my mother asked why I looked so tired, I told her I was building something. I didn't tell her what, because if I said his name out loud too often, I was afraid reality would hear and correct me. Then the calls became shorter. Weeks turned into months. When I asked if something was wrong, he laughed it off. "I'm just busy," he said. "This is what success costs." I swallowed that answer like medicine, bitter but necessary. People around me changed. Friends got married, cousins moved away. I stayed exactly where I was, telling myself that loyalty was a virtue, not a cage. I defended him when whispers started, about him being seen with other women, about photos online I pretended not to notice. One night, I finally asked the question I'd been avoiding. "Are you still coming back for me?" There was a pause, long enough for fear to sit down beside me. "Of course," he said. "Why would you even ask that?" So I apologized for doubting him, for being scared, for needing reassurance like love wasn't supposed to need oxygen. After that, the silence grew teeth. When he finally stopped calling altogether, I told myself it was temporary, that real men focus, that success doesn't have time for sentiment. I told myself so many lies that the truth stopped knocking. Years passed. I changed too, just not in ways that made headlines. I learned how to survive disappointment without collapsing. I learned how to smile at weddings while mourning the life I thought I'd have. I learned that hope can be quiet and still dangerous. And then one afternoon, a message appeared. "Hey, I'm back in town." No apology, no explanation, just those 5 words, like he hadn't disappeared for years, like I hadn't built my entire emotional infrastructure around his absence. Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet. That's how I ended up standing on that street, watching him step out of that car, looking like a man who had finally outrun his past. He hugged me lightly, too lightly, not like someone returning home, but like someone greeting an old memory they weren't sure they wanted to keep. We sat at a cafe that didn't exist back when we were poor. He ordered without looking at prices. I noticed everything: the watch, the posture, the way his eyes scanned the room like it belonged to him. "You look good," he said. "So do you," I replied, even though something in my chest had already started to crack. He talked about business, investments, connections. He spoke fluently now, confidently, like hunger had been erased from his vocabulary. When I mentioned the old days, the meals, the promises, he smiled politely, like I'd brought up a childhood nickname. "You remember everything," he said, not warmly, almost amused. Then he dropped the truth, casually between sips of coffee. I'm getting married. The word married hit me harder than any insult ever could. My ears rang, my hands went numb. He continued, I wanted you to hear it from me. You were important to me once. Once. I asked who she was. He hesitated, just long enough for the answer to sting. She comes from a good family, connections, stability. You understand. I didn't, but I nodded anyway, because dignity felt like the only thing I still owned. As we stood to leave, he reached into his pocket and handed me an envelope, thick, heavy. Consider this a thank you for everything you did back then. Money. He tried to pay for my years, for my waiting, for the love that fed him when the world wouldn't. I didn't open it. I didn't have to. The insult was loud enough unopened. Before I could respond, a woman approached us, elegant, confident. Her hand slid naturally into his arm. This must be her, she said, smiling at me. The one you told me about. The one. He didn't correct her. In that moment, I realized something terrifying. He didn't come back for closure. He came back to make sure the past couldn't embarrass him, to settle debts, to rewrite history with a receipt. As they walked away together, laughter trailing behind them, I finally opened the envelope. Inside was more money than I had ever held at once, and a note. We're even now. My hand shook, not from sadness, but from something darker, something colder, something awake. Because right then, standing alone with his money burning in my hands, I understood the truth he never expected me to realize. He thought this was over, but he had no idea what his return had just started. And as I looked down at my phone, a notification lit up my screen, something that would change everything and pull him back into my life in a way he could never control. That notification stayed on my screen longer than it should have, not because it was complicated, but because it was dangerous. It wasn't from him. It wasn't from the woman on his arm. It was from someone who knew both of us and knew more than they should have. Is it true? The message read. Is he really back? I stared at the words, my reflection faintly visible on the dark glass of my phone. For years, my life had been quiet. Painful, yes, but predictable. And now, in a single afternoon, everything that had been buried was crawling back to the surface. I didn't reply. I went home instead. I placed the envelope on my table like it was something alive. The money felt heavy, not in weight, but in meaning. It was supposed to close the story. That's what he thought. A clean ending, a transaction, no loose ends. But love doesn't work like accounting. That night, I didn't sleep. Memories kept looping in my head. Him eating quietly so no one would notice how hungry he was. Him whispering dreams into the dark. Him promising me a future that now belonged to someone else. I realized something then that made my stomach twist. He didn't just leave me behind. He outgrew me on purpose. The next morning, my phone buzzed again. Same number. You should know something, the message continued. He never told her the full story about you. I sat down slowly. The sender was an old mutual acquaintance, someone who'd stayed in touch with his world long after I'd been erased from it, someone who had watched his transformation from the sidelines. I typed one word. What? The reply came instantly, like it had been waiting. He told her you were just a girl who helped him once. Nothing serious, no promise, no waiting. My chest tightened, not because he lied, but because he lied so easily. He rewrote me into a footnote, a charity case, something convenient and forgettable. For the first time in years, anger rose higher than grief. I asked for more, and once the truth started pouring out, it didn't stop. He'd spoken about me publicly, carefully, strategically. He used my kindness as a motivational story. Back when I was broke, someone helped me survive, he'd say. He never used my name, never mentioned love, just a vague symbol of struggle he could reference when it made him look humble. I was part of his brand now. That realization burned. Days passed, and I tried to ignore it. I tried to live like his return hadn't cracked something inside me. But the city had grown smaller. I kept seeing his face on billboards, on social media, and articles praising his self-made journey. One headline stopped me cold. Local entrepreneur returns home a success, engaged to prominent family's daughter. The comments underneath were worse. He deserves it. Hard work pays off. True inspiration. I wondered if anyone knew who fed that inspiration when it was starving. Then something unexpected happened. A producer reached out to me. They'd seen my YouTube videos, the raw ones, the quiet ones where I talked about waiting, about being forgotten, about how promises can shape entire lifetimes. They didn't mention his name, but I knew exactly why they were calling. "We think your story could help people," they said. "Would you be willing to share more?" I hesitated. For years, I'd protected his image, even when he wasn't protecting me. Speaking out felt like betrayal, until I realized I'd been loyal to someone who had already rewritten me out of existence. I said yes. The video went live on a Sunday night. I didn't name him. I didn't accuse. I just told the truth about feeding someone who promised forever, about waiting while they climbed, about being paid off instead of chosen. I thought it would disappear into the internet like everything else. It didn't. By morning, the views were climbing. Comments poured in. Strangers saw themselves in my story. Women, men, people who had loved someone through their worst years only to be left behind when success arrived. And then he noticed. I knew because he called. His voice was different this time, tight, controlled. "Why are you doing this?" he asked. No greeting, no concern, just accusation. I told my story, that's all. "You know people will connect the dots," he snapped. "You're making me look bad." I laughed softly, not because it was funny, but because it was absurd. After all these years, he still thought this was about him. "You did that yourself," I replied. There was a long silence. Then his tone changed. Lower, more dangerous. "You're being emotional," he said. "Don't ruin something you don't understand." That's when I saw him clearly, not as the hungry boy I fed, but as the man who believes success gave him the right to erase people. He hung up on me. 2 hours later, my phone exploded with notifications. His engagement announcement had been deleted. His social media went private, and whispers, real ones, started circulating. Because the thing he never considered was this: the truth doesn't need names when the timing is perfect. That night, I received a message I never expected to see. It was from her. It said, "I think we need to talk. There are things he never told me." My heart dropped into my stomach because I knew whatever conversation was coming next would tear the last layer off the lie he'd built his life on. And once the truth reached her, there would be no going back. I stared at her message for a long time before responding. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because I knew whatever I said next would change lives. Mine, hers, and his. "I'm willing," I finally typed, "but only if you really want the truth." She replied almost immediately, "I do." We agreed to meet somewhere neutral, public, safe. A quiet cafe near the river, far from the places he used to take me, far from the new world he now occupied so comfortably. I arrived early, my hands wrapped around a cup of tea I didn't drink. I wasn't shaking, but I felt alert, like something inside me had switched on. When she walked in, I understood immediately why he chose her. She was composed, elegant, the kind of woman people assumed would always land on her feet. She smiled politely when she saw me, but there was tension in her shoulders, fear maybe, or intuition finally catching up. "Thank you for coming," she said as she sat down. "I know this is uncomfortable." "It is," I said gently, "but you asked." She took a breath. "He told me you helped him once, that you were kind. That was it." I nodded. "That's the shortened version." She flinched. Not dramatically, just enough to tell me she already knew something was wrong. So I told her everything. Not with anger, not with tears, just facts. How we met, how I fed him, how I waited, how he promised me marriage when he was rich, how he left, how he returned, how he tried to pay me off like a closed account. I didn't dramatize it. I didn't need to. The truth was heavy enough on its own. She listened without interrupting. Her hands tightened around her cup as the story went on. When I mentioned the envelope of money, her eyes finally filled, not with jealousy, but with humiliation. "He told me he had no one," she whispered. "He said he made it on his own." "That's what he tells everyone," I replied softly. She asked one question that caught me off guard. "Did he love you?" I paused. "Yes," I said, "but not enough to be honest." That broke something in her. She looked down, nodded slowly, like she was piecing together moments that suddenly made sense. His defensiveness, his control over the narrative, the way he never talked about the past unless it made him look strong. "He proposed quickly," she said. "He wanted everything locked in, fast." Of course he did. When we stood to leave, she thanked me, not with warmth, with respect. The kind you give someone who handed you a truth you didn't want but needed. "I don't know what I'll do yet," she said, "but I won't ignore this." Neither would I. That night, my video crossed 1 million views. Messages poured in from everywhere, people sharing stories eerily similar to mine. Some were supportive, some were angry on my behalf. A few warned me to stop. One message stood out. "Be careful," it read. "Power doesn't like being exposed." I didn't respond. The next day, his lawyer contacted me. They claimed defamation, claimed my content was damaging a public figure's reputation, claimed I was exaggerating events for attention. I forwarded the message to a friend and laughed for the first time in years, not because it was funny, but because it was desperate. He wasn't trying to fix things. He was trying to silence me. I refused to take the video down. That's when things escalated. Anonymous accounts began attacking me online. Old photos surfaced. Personal details were leaked. Someone emailed my workplace questioning my integrity. The pressure was calculated, designed to exhaust me into compliance. For a brief moment, I considered backing down, not because I was wrong, but because I was tired. Then my phone rang. It was my mother. She said, "I saw your video. Why didn't you tell me?" "I didn't want you to worry." She was silent for a moment. Then she said something I will never forget. "You fed him when he was hungry. You don't owe anyone silence." That grounded me. I uploaded another video, not accusing, not naming, just clarifying, reclaiming my voice. The comments doubled, the support intensified. And then something unexpected happened. A former business partner of his reached out. "I can't stay quiet anymore," the message said. "He's not who people think he is." My pulse quickened. They told me about unpaid debts, about investors misled, about stories adjusted to fit whatever narrative benefited him most. Nothing illegal, just unethical enough to shatter the illusion. The image of the self-made man began to crack. And through all of this, he stayed silent. Until one night, when he showed up at my door, unannounced, uninvited. I opened it slowly. He stood there alone this time, no suit, no smile, just raw anger barely held together. "You've done enough," he said. "You want revenge? Fine, you win. Just stop." I looked at him, really looked at him, and felt nothing I expected. No longing, no sadness, just clarity. "This was never revenge," I said. "This is the consequence of lying." He stepped closer. "You don't understand what you're risking." I didn't step back. "I understand exactly what I survived." For the first time, he looked afraid.
And before he could say any other word, my phone buzzed in my pocket. A news alert. His engagement had officially been called off. I looked at the screen, then back at him, and in that moment, I knew this wasn't the end. It was the turning point.
He didn't say a word when he saw the news on my phone. His face drained slowly, like someone realizing the ground beneath them wasn't solid after all. For a man who had mastered control, this was unfamiliar territory. "So she told you," he finally said. Not a question, an accusation. "She asked," I replied. I answered. He ran a hand through his hair, pacing my small living room like it offended him. "You had no right," he snapped. "That was my past." "You made it my future," I said calmly. That stopped him. For years, I had imagined this confrontation, me crying, him apologizing, some dramatic collapse of pride. Instead, it felt strangely quiet, like the end of a long illness. Painful, yes, but also clarifying. "You don't understand how this works," he said, lowering his voice. "People like me can't afford messy histories." I looked at him, stunned by how easily the truth slipped out of his mouth. "People like you?" I repeated. He hesitated, just long enough. "You wouldn't survive where I am now," he said. "This world is ruthless." I smiled, not kindly, not cruelly, just honestly. "I survived being abandoned," I said. "I'll be fine." That's when he changed tactics. He softened, his shoulders dropped, his voice warmed, the same voice he used years ago when he needed something. "I never meant to hurt you. I was just trying to escape poverty. You know what that feels like." "Yes," I said, "and I didn't step on anyone to do it." He moved closer, lowering his voice like a secret. "We could fix this together. I can take care of you quietly." There it was. Not love, not remorse, management. I stepped back and opened the door. "You should leave." His eyes hardened instantly. "You're making a mistake." "No," I said. "I already made it once. I'm not repeating it." He lingered for a second, like he wanted to say something that might still matter. Then he walked away. I locked the door and slid down against it, heart racing, not from fear, but from release. The past had finally left the room. I thought that was the end of it. It wasn't. 2 days later, a long post appeared online, carefully worded, polished, sympathetic. He didn't name me, but he didn't have to. He framed himself as a victim of misunderstandings and emotional exaggerations. He spoke about how success attracts resentment, how some people struggle to let go of the past. The comments were divided. Some defended him fiercely. Others questioned the timing. The illusion was weakening, but not shattered. Then something unexpected happened. One of his earliest investors, someone he'd quietly cut out once the money grew, shared my video with a caption that read, "This isn't the first time he's erased someone who helped him." That did it. The narrative shifted overnight. More people spoke up, former partners, old acquaintances. Patterns emerged. Not crimes, just truths stacked so high they couldn't be ignored. Brands paused partnerships, interviews were canceled, invitations quietly disappeared. And through it all, I stayed quiet. That was the part he never anticipated. I didn't gloat, I didn't chase attention. I posted one final video, not about him, but about me, about choosing self-respect over waiting for empathy, about releasing the version of yourself built around someone else's potential. The response was overwhelming. Messages from young women who said they were leaving relationships that felt familiar, from men who admitted they'd taken people for granted while chasing success, from people who said, "Your story stopped me from becoming him." That mattered more than revenge ever could. Weeks passed, then months. His name faded from the headlines. Mine didn't explode, but it endured.
Quiet growth, loyal audience, a community built on honesty instead of image. One evening, as I was packing up after filming, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. "I owe you an apology," the message read. I didn't reply. Another message followed. "I lost everything." I stared at the screen, searching myself for satisfaction. There was none. Only confirmation. I blocked the number because the truth is this: I didn't want him to suffer. I wanted him to see. And once I realized he still didn't, still centered himself even in collapse, I understood my role in his story was finally over. Or so I thought. A week later, an email arrived in my inbox. No name, no greeting, just a subject line that made my stomach drop. "There's something you should know about the promise he made you." Attached with a document. I opened it slowly, and as I read the first line, my breath caught, because this wasn't about betrayal anymore. This was about a decision he made before he ever left, a decision that explained everything. And if it was true, then the promise he whispered under that streetlight all those years ago wasn't just broken, it was never real to begin with. I read the first line of the document 3 times before it made sense. It was a letter, dated years ago, before he left, before the scholarship, before the goodbye that rearranged my life. The words were formal, carefully chosen, like someone already practicing how to sound impressive. "I have decided that emotional attachments from my current environment may limit my future growth. Any relationships formed during this period will be treated as temporary." My hands went cold. The email explained where the document came from. It had been written as part of a mentorship application, an exercise about strategic detachment. He had outlined his plan to leave his past behind, including me, long before he ever promised me marriage. The sender remained anonymous, but the intent was clear. This wasn't about jealousy. This wasn't about revenge. This was about truth. I kept reading. He had written about needing support systems until he no longer required them, about how loyalty from others could be useful, but loyalty to others was a liability, about choosing a partner later who matched his status trajectory. I sat there, staring at the screen, feeling something inside me finally snap, not in pain, but in clarity. The promise under the streetlight, the tears in his eyes, the trembling voice. It was all rehearsed. He hadn't lied impulsively. He had lied strategically. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't feel the dramatic collapse I'd expected if I ever learned the full truth. I felt free. Because there's a strange peace that comes with knowing you weren't abandoned for being unworthy. You were used for being kind. That night, I didn't sleep. Not because I was restless, but because I was thinking, carefully, deliberately. By morning, I had made a decision. I would tell this part of the story too. Not to destroy him, but to finish what he started. I filmed the next video in one take. No makeup, no music, just my voice and the document on the screen. "I need you to understand something," I said to the camera. "Some people don't break promises by accident. They make them knowing they won't keep them because promises buy time." The response was immediate and explosive. People weren't just reacting emotionally anymore. They were analyzing, connecting dots, recognizing patterns in their own lives. Psychologists commented, coaches, survivors of emotional manipulation. A phrase kept appearing in the comments. "He future faked her." And suddenly, my story wasn't just personal, it was educational. That scared him, because a villain can survive hate, but a case study destroys myths. That afternoon, my lawyer called. "He's considering legal action again," she said, "but he's hesitating." "Why?" I asked. "Because discovery would be inconvenient for him."
I smiled. The document spread quietly, then widely, not leaked recklessly, but discussed thoughtfully, carefully, like a truth people had been waiting to name. And then he broke. He posted a video. No comments allowed, no live chat, just him sitting in a dimly lit room trying to look sincere. He spoke about pressure, about ambition, about making mistakes, about how poverty had traumatized him. He never said my name. He never denied the document. He ended with this line: "I hope one day she understands I did what I had to do." That's when the internet turned on him, because people heard what I heard. I hurt you, and I don't regret it. The backlash was swift. Sponsors pulled out entirely. Former allies distanced themselves publicly. Interviews were canceled mid-negotiation. His carefully curated image collapsed under the weight of his own words. And for the first time since I met him, he lost control of the story. 3 days later, he requested a private meeting. No lawyers, no cameras, just 5 minutes, he said through a mutual contact. I need to explain. I almost said no, but then I realized something important. Closure isn't something someone gives you, it's something you take. We met in the same cafe where he told me he was getting married. Full circle. He looked smaller, not poorer, but stripped like a man without armor. "He never thought you'd find out," he said quietly. "I know," I replied. He tried to justify himself. Again, trauma, fear, survival. But the words sounded thin now, even to him. "I did care about you," he insisted, "in my own way." I leaned forward slightly. "No," I said. "You cared about what I provided. That's not the same thing." That's when his voice cracked. "Do you know what it's like to be nothing?" he asked. "Yes," I answered, "and I didn't become this to escape it." Silence settled between us. Finally, he asked the question that revealed everything. "What do you want from me?" I stood up. "Nothing," I said, "and that's what scares you most." As I walked away, I felt something shift, not dramatically, but permanently. I was no longer reacting to him. I was done orbiting him. That night, I uploaded one final video in the series, not exposing, not accusing, just this sentence. If someone asks you to wait while they become themselves, make sure they're not planning to become someone who leaves you behind. It became the most shared video on my channel, and while the world debated his fall, something quieter but far more important was happening in my life. An opportunity arrived, one that had nothing to do with him, one that would take me far from this city and into a future I had never imagined for myself. But accepting it meant closing this chapter forever. And before I could do that, he made one last move, a move that would force me to choose between ending the story peacefully or telling the final truth that would destroy the last illusion he had left. The move he made wasn't loud. It wasn't public. And that's what made it dangerous. 3 days after my final video went live, I received a formal envelope in the mail. No return address, heavy paper, legal weight. The kind of envelope that doesn't ask, it informs. Inside was a cease and desist letter, but not for defamation, for breach of a private agreement. I laughed out loud at first, a short, disbelieving sound, because I knew I had never signed anything. We were poor, we were young, we were emotional. Nothing about us was contractual. Then I turned the page. Attached was a scanned document. My stomach dropped. It was a copy of a mutual understanding agreement dated the same month he left, written in vague language, no official letterhead, no witnesses, and at the bottom, my name, my handwriting, my signature. or something that looked terrifyingly close to it. My hands began to shake, not from fear, but from adrenaline, because I recognized the paper. It was a blank page, a page I had signed years ago when he asked me to help him fill out forms late one night. He said he needed multiple signed sheets just in case mistakes were made. I hadn't questioned it. We trusted each other. I trusted him. He had kept it, and years later, he had turned it into a weapon. The letter claimed I had agreed not to speak publicly about our personal relationship in exchange for future consideration. It accused me of violating confidentiality and hinted at damages so large they made my head spin. This wasn't about winning. This was about intimidation. I called my lawyer immediately. She was quiet for a long time as she read. "This is creative," she finally said, "and sloppy." "But dangerous," I replied. "Yes," she agreed, "only if you're scared." I wasn't scared. I was furious, because this crossed a line he could never uncross. This wasn't manipulation anymore. This was forgery. And if he was willing to do this, it meant one thing. There were no limits left. I had two choices. Option 1, stay silent, settle quietly, protect myself, walk away into my new opportunity with minimal damage. Option 2, do what I'd been doing all along, tell the truth, the whole truth, including the part that would expose not just his character, but his methods. I didn't decide immediately. I went for a long walk that night. No phone, no music, just me and the weight of what came next. I thought about the girl I used to be, the one who fed a hungry boy and believed love was enough to protect her. Then I thought about the people watching now, the ones in the comments, the ones who had messaged me privately saying, "I think this is happening to me too." Silence would protect me, but truth could protect others. That's when I knew. The next morning, I uploaded the video. I didn't show the document at first. I told the story about being asked to sign blank papers, about trust being used as leverage, about how people with power don't always need to lie, they just need to wait. Then, slowly, calmly, I showed the evidence. The timestamps, the handwriting analysis, the inconsistencies. Experts weighed in within hours. This wouldn't hold up in court. This is coercive behavior. This suggests intent. The word forgery started trending alongside his name. That's when everything exploded. News outlets picked it up. Not gossip blogs, real ones, legal commentators, ethics panels. The story shifted from emotional betrayal to potential criminal exposure. And finally, he panicked. He called me, repeatedly, voicemails stacked on top of each other. "You don't understand what you're doing. Take it down. We can fix this. You're ruining my life." I didn't answer. Instead, I received a call from someone else, a journalist. They had something bigger. Documents, emails, patterns, a trail that suggested I wasn't the first and wouldn't have been the last. They said, "You're the one who broke the dam. Now everything's coming out." That night, I sat alone in my apartment, watching the story move without me, watching his image unravel in real time, watching the illusion finally collapse under its own weight. And then, one final message came through. From him. Just one sentence. "You could have been everything." I stared at it for a long time. Then I typed back, "You were. You just couldn't afford honesty." I blocked the number. The next morning, the headline was everywhere. "Former entrepreneur under investigation for document manipulation and coercive practices." His accounts went dark.
His website disappeared. The man who once promised me forever couldn't even hold on to the lie he built him. And as the dust settled, I realized something profound. This story was never about him becoming rich. It was about me becoming unreachable. Because the moment I stopped waiting for someone else's future, I claimed my own. But the story wasn't finished yet, because while the world thought this was the end, there was one final truth left to say, one that had nothing to do with betrayal and everything to do with healing.
When the noise finally stopped, it felt unfamiliar. No notifications exploding, no new headlines, no strangers dissecting my past like it belonged to them. Just silence. And for the first time in years, that silence didn't feel empty. It felt earned. I packed my apartment slowly, deliberately. Each item I placed into a box felt like a quiet goodbye to a version of myself that had waited, hoped, endured. I didn't hate her. I honored her. She had loved bravely in a world that often punishes softness. The opportunity I'd been offered was real. A fellowship, a chance to work with creators and advocates who use storytelling to protect people from exactly what I had survived. Different city, different life, no ghosts attached. The night before I left, I sat on the floor surrounded by half-packed boxes and rewatched my very first video, the one nobody saw, the one where my voice shook and I didn't yet know what I was allowed to say out loud. I realized something then. I had never told my story to be believed. I told it so I could stop carrying it alone. Messages still came in, slower now but deeper. I left him after your video. I stopped waiting. I chose myself. Those were the real outcomes, not his downfall, not the public reckoning, but the quiet exits happening in lives I'd never see. On my last morning in the city, I took one final walk past the cafe where it all began. The milk crates were gone, the old manager long retired, the place had been renovated into something sleek and forgettable. I smiled. Some things are only sacred because of who we were when they happened. At the airport, as I waited to board, I thought about promises. How dangerous they can be when made too early, how seductive they sound when spoken by someone desperate, how easy it is to confuse potential with commitment. Here is the truth I wish someone had told me back then. A promise about the future means nothing if it requires you to pause your present. If someone asks you to wait for them to become whole, ask yourself why they're comfortable with you staying incomplete. Love is not a loan, loyalty is not an investment strategy, and kindness is not consent to be used. I don't regret feeding him. I don't regret loving him. I regret only one thing, confusing endurance with devotion. As the plane lifted off, I felt something settle inside me, not closure like a door slamming shut, but closure like a window opening, air, light, possibility. I am no longer the girl who waited under a flickering streetlight. I am the woman who walked away with her voice intact. And if you're listening to this right now, if you're holding on to a promise that keeps asking you to shrink, to pause, to postpone your life, hear me clearly. If they can become everything without you, they never planned on becoming it with you. Choose the future that doesn't require your disappearance. This story ends here, but yours doesn't have to.